I suspect we have many who will be joining us online, so we can probably turn on the webcam, and we have several who may be joining us around the world, actually, and we welcome everyone to our third annual Evolution Weekend program here in Maryland. And the title of today's presentation and theme is Science, Story, and Scripture, Living Together with Understanding. Everybody is welcome at this forum, as always, from believers of all faiths to skeptics and non-believers. We gather here for dialogue, not so much for debate, but for understanding discourse. Tonight's program is presented by a group that works very closely together, the Evolution Weekend Maryland Local Organizing Committee, and I'll show you some of those folks' pictures and in just a minute, but in partnership with the major host of this event, which is Wesley Nexus Incorporated, and we'll introduce you more to them in just a minute. If you have questions about anything related to tonight's events, please ask a member of the Evolution Weekend MD Local Organizing Committee or any of the folks up here at the table. There will be opportunities to write on your cards in your programs and to contribute to later discussion. So who is this Evolution Weekend MD Local Organizing Committee? It is Maynard Moore, who is here to my right, Rick Barr in the audience over here waving his hand, Margaret Matson, who you met out at the registration table, Wendell Thompson, and myself, who chairs the committee. And we also have several volunteers who make this day possible. And Jared Sherman is going to be handling our computing and IT connections back there so that we can take email questions from anyone. If you have folks at home that you're in contact with by phone and they want to call in or call up the web stream, they can send in email questions, and Jared will collect them and bring them to the front. Laura Hungerford, my wife, is helping with various logistics today. Tom Minuccia is doing our photography. Al Kuling is all the way in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but he has been giving expert advice. And Allison Minuccia has also been working out at the front table. So I don't know if some of you were here last year, but truth was the subject of last year's Evolution Weekend MD. And what was discussed was that truth is of a different order from scientific truth. And the statement that comes from the Clergy Letter Project, the Clergy Letter itself, which is the originator of Evolution Weekend back in 2006, is that the statement in the letter says, religious truth is of a different order from scientific truth. Its purpose is not to convey scientific information, but to transform hearts. Science and religion are, it says, two very different but complementary forms of truth. And to this letter, and by the way, there is a rabbi letter, there is a Buddhist letter, there's a Unitarian Universalist letter, and there are other letters as well that I believe are in drafting, including a Muslim letter, an imam letter. But nearly 13,000 clergy have signed on to this letter, which seeks to increase understanding between science and faith. So the Clergy Letter Project, if you want to go visit, it's a fascinating site with great resources. And Michael Zimmerman, we give greetings to Michael, who is out there somewhere, we hope, listening to this. He is the founder and director of the Global Clergy Letter Project. And as I said, there were several clergy letters. These are the numbers of signatories to those letters by clergy, Christian clergy letter, almost 13,000, rabbi letter, 514, and so forth. So last year's topic put a smile on some folks' face. We took it straight from this book. Daddy, is that story true, or were you just preaching? Which was a book that, by the way, is part of our door prize collection this year again, because it is written by a Methodist minister who's written over 40 books. And James W. Moore recalls how several years ago, when delivering his sermon, his son asked him just that question. And it caused Dr. Moore to think a little bit and Pastor Moore explained to his young son in the following way, and I think that this helps us reach the understandings that we're looking for. True stories are stories about things that actually happened. They took place in history. They really occurred. On the other hand, a truth story is a story that teaches us great truth. A true story may not have actually happened in history. Was the story of the prodigal son a true story or a truth story? Well, we don't know for sure. Either way, the story helps teach us an awesome lesson about God and life and God's family. So as I was thinking about understanding and how science can relate, as you know, this forum has a lot to do with how science and faith interact, how science has worked with people who have very firm beliefs in certain systems of philosophy. And I thought back to my childhood when science diplomacy really came onto the scene in a very big way in international affairs. And Wikipedia gives a nice definition of it, but what I remember is the docking in the 1970s of Soyuz and Apollo, which was such a big deal. And this occurred right in the middle of the Cold War, of course. And then it went on, of course, all the way to the the International Space Station, involving many countries. And most of this space diplomacy continued on through some of the worst years politically, but it sustained throughout all of that. Is there anything cuter than a bunch of napping pandas? Panda diplomacy through the Smithsonian Institution's zoo between China and the U.S., of course, was a very, very big effort at reaching understanding between countries. And keeping a panda happy takes science, by the way. And so there was a lot of scientific exchange. I know some of the people at the zoo who worked on that, and they said it was quite a challenge to figure out what they'd eat and how we would get that here in the U.S. And one of the most incredible accomplishments was the International Human Genome Project, led by Francis Collins. Dr. Collins is head of the NIH right now, was head of the Genome Project in the US, and de facto head internationally. And he is a devout Christian and has written many wonderful texts and books and articles that I encourage you to look at, and one of them is The Language of God. And at the same time as he is a devout Christian, he believes firmly in the tenets of evolutionary science. And he does a very good job of explaining it at the level that you don't have to be a scientist to necessarily understand. Well, how could we take what we learned from international affairs, where there's certainly great rifts between how people think, and apply it to religion, where sometimes there are some rifts that keep us apart? And so I changed a few words around, and I took that definition from Wikipedia, but changed, instead of international, interfaith. So science diplomacy and interfaith affairs, can it work? The use of common scientific understanding among faiths to address common challenges facing humanity and to build constructive interfaith partnerships instead of international partnerships, although the two can go hand in hand. And what are some of those common and shared goals? Feed the hungry, cure the sick, and prevent suffering. I work for the Department of Agriculture. Many people I know work for the Department of Health and Human Services. Many others are earth and space scientists. And to a man and a woman, every one of them is working towards those goals. And certainly there's enormous overlap with the missions of faith and science. So science, faith, diplomacy has great potential, but there are at least two subjects, and you can probably come up with more, on which common ground has been obstinately elusive. And one of them is, of course, climate change right now, which has an interesting disparity in our population. Consensus 97% of climate scientists agree the planet's warming. Not just that, 97% agree that it is likely due to human activity. Yet, 56% of evangelical Christians believe climate change is caused by other factors than humans. So we have this chasm between science and many of the people in our country. And regarding creation and evolution, while 99% of scientists accept scientific models of evolution, that's according to a recent poll reported in the Huffington Post, 56% of Americans believe it is objectively true or probably true that God created the universe and all life at once by divine fiat within the last 10,000 years. Again, another chasm But is this a chasm, or is it an opportunity for there to be discourse between science and religion to come to some common understanding? I tend to believe the latter, because in many other aspects of human endeavor, including medicine and agriculture, feeding the world, there are clear similarities of mission. And we have our work cut out for us because of these chasms, because there's essential grace at stake. There are people who need what science can give, and there are people who need what religion can give. And I look forward to a day when there can be a locking of arms between these incredibly powerful forces in folks' lives, so that we can make headway for the benefit of all. There will be, incidentally, by 2100, according to the World Health Organization, the last line here, 10 billion people, that's 3 billion more than we have on the planet right now, living in a climate likely to be very different than the one most of us have known. We just heard at USDA, if some of you maybe grow gardens, you've seen the hardiness zone chart. Well, the hardiness zone chart has just shifted up a half level because of the global effects of climate change. But some of us are wondering, is it true that it is human caused, and how much investment do we put into that? I think the concern for many of us is that the people who will pay most and first and most dearly for the effects of climate change will be the most needy among us. Those who are in coastal communities who can no longer live there, those who can no longer grow crops, as is occurring actually in the southwest of the U.S. Because of changes in climate. So what does one church do about this? One of the reasons I'm pleased to be a United Methodist is how the steps the United Methodist Church has taken to deal with these issues. And they have a general conference every 4 years, and the general conference is the principal legislative body for the United Methodist Church. And the people, not the bishops, but the delegates to this convention, decide what policy is for the United Methodist Church. And I think some of the language here, which they pine over and work every word carefully, is very instructive. So Resolution 1027, under God's creation in the church, as disciples of Christ, we are called to be good stewards of God's creation. Accordingly, we call upon the United Methodist Church to adopt fresh ways to respond to the perils that now threaten the integrity of God's creation and the future of God's children. Specifically, the United Methodist Church endorses the Clergy Letter Project, which, by the way, is a latter page in your program. The whole letter is there. The Clergy Letter Project and its reconciliatory programs between religion and science, and urges the United Methodist clergy participation. They go on to say, also in the 2012 Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, under Science and Technology, we recognize science as a legitimate interpretation of God's natural world. We affirm the validity of the claims of science in describing the natural world and in determining what is scientific. We preclude science from making authoritative claims about theological issues, and theology from making authoritative claims about scientific issues. We find that science's descriptions of cosmological, geological, and biological evolution are not in conflict with theology. Further, we recognize the medical, technical, and scientific technologies as legitimate uses of God's natural world when such uses enhance human life and enables all of God's children to develop their God-given creative potential without violating our ethical convictions about the relationships of humanity to the natural world. We re-examine our ethical convictions as our understanding of the natural world increases. We find that as science expands human understanding of the natural world, our understanding of the mysteries of God's creation and world are enhanced. And the last one, there were 3 science-friendly resolutions in 2008 that have been sustained through 2012, states that whereas the United Methodist Church has for many years supported the separation of church and state, therefore be it resolved that the General Conference of the United Methodist Church go on record as opposing the introduction of any faith-based theories such as creationism or intelligent design into the science curriculum of our public schools. So this is not our aim today. Nor is this, oh, yes, this one is. I'm sorry. No, this is. This is from our friend who wrote one of the books that we have out here, Thank God for Evolution. He drives a van. He and his wife live itinerantly, give talks around the country. They have several TED Talks, Michael Dowd and his wife. And this is what's on the side of their white van, is the Jesus and Darwin fish kissing and making up. So for a day in the future. So let's begin today. And may the heavens smile upon us. This is a recently released photograph from NASA. That is not photoshopped. That is what it really looked like through the telescope. Just released image captured. The telescope captured this image in 2012. It looks like two glowing eyes and several curvy lines forming a face and a smile. Those curvatures are actually gravitational lensing effects that occur in space. So, you know, it looks to me like a happy jack-o'-lantern, and I kind of like that. So I'm going to give up the lectern here, and we'll start the program. Thank you for coming from the local organizing committee, and you'll have further welcomes from those who have supported this effort over the last 3 years. We'll begin now with a welcome from the United Methodist Conference of Baltimore, Washington Conference, Reverend J.W. Park.
Good afternoon. As the screen says, my name is J.W. Park, and I'd like to extend a welcome from our bishop, resident bishop here, Bishop Marcus Matthews, to a mission center of Baltimore Washington Annual Conference of United Methodist Church. And I'm just so glad that the weather wasn't that friendly, but you're all here. And this is our endeavor of bringing reconciliation between faith and science. It's wonderful that different faith tradition come together and have a sharing our thoughts and through panel and discussion. So I hope and pray that you enjoy this panel tonight. And when you go home this evening, we all learn something new. Thank you. Again, I welcome all of you.
Thank you. Maynard.
Thank you, J.W. And I want to say that we appreciate very much the support that you have provided to Wesley Nexus as a board member and now on our advisory board. You've been very helpful to us all along. I'm Maynard Moore, president of Wesley Nexus, and I want to take this opportunity to introduce a friend and colleague, Rabbi George Dreesen, the founder and president of the Institute for Science and Judaism, who will bring our invocation and blessing on the meeting. Rabbi George.
Thank you, Maynard, and thank you for bestowing this honor upon me, which I appreciate. Bruchim habayim b'shem Adonai. Blessed are you who come in the name of God, or, if God is not part of your vocabulary, of godliness. Blessed is God who has commanded us to become engaged in the needs of all our communities. May God, whose grace endows humans with knowledge, understanding, and intelligence, bless us all on this day and every day with enlightenment and wisdom, so that we may help one another to discern God's handiwork in the newly visioned firmament. Amen.
Thank you. Some of you will recognize that Rabbi George has been a participant in all three of our sessions on Evolution Weekend, starting in 2013. I now want to call your attention to our sponsors. You have heard already from Gary about the Clergy Letter Project, and we appreciate Michael Zimmerman's support for this program and others around the country. Michael, we know you're out in the Pacific Northwest, and we just want you to know that we appreciate your support. The second major sponsor is the Institute for Science and and for Religion in an Age of Science, Institute for Religion in an Age of Science, IRIS. And we have with us a representative of the IRIS Governing Council, a good friend of mine for the past 10 years or so that I have been active in IRIS, Jennifer Whitten. And Jennifer is going to bring you greetings from the IRIS Council. Some of the material from the IRIS organization is out on the front table, and so please be sure to pick up one of those packets before you leave.
This is what it looks like, and I'm grateful that one of you helped me collate the last page. It's really wonderful to be here with you on behalf of IRIS and also on behalf of myself. I grew up as a Methodist, and I always feel happy when I see how the Methodist Church is evolving. I will tell you, we didn't have anything like this when I was growing up. So IRIS is a group that has in it Christians, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, atheists, religious naturalists, hardcore scientists, hardcore religionists, and a whole bunch of lay people who are interested in the intersections of dialogue. And I'll tell you a tiny bit about it. There's a lot in here. We have even a membership form, and we have different conferences from the past and this year's conference. But I'll tell you a little bit about what started. The first conference was in 1954, and it was called Religion in an Age of Science. And then we had 1955, What is man that thou art mindful of him? You can imagine. And what are good and evil? And what is truth? And what is the role of religion in an age of science? And then in recent years, we've increasingly been looking at things like climate change. We had a conference on eco-morality, the role of nurturing from scientific and religious perspectives, water and the water crisis. So we've looked at a lot of topics, food. This year we have kind of an unusual topic. We have, it's heavy on the religion, and it's heavy on sort of how we would be changing our perception of science if we applied certain elements of new religious thinking to it. But I would like to invite you all to look at the materials and to talk with me afterwards if you have questions. I remember when I first went was 20 years ago, and at that time you would sit down at breakfast at the conference, and really you would just see people talking about the topics. I mean, you couldn't have a conversation about breakfast. Well, now they're a lot warmer, and they're a lot more able to just engage in daily conversation. But the topics are increasingly challenging and interesting. We've had early on B.F. Skinner, Margaret Mead, E.O. Wilson, Howard Thurman, one of the spiritual advisors for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the dean of Harvard Divinity School. And we need more Methodists, and Jews, and Muslims, and everyone else. So atheists, scientists, please come, please join us.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I now need to introduce Connie Burtka, who is on our advisory board. But Connie is not going to be able to be here this afternoon because of family obligations. Her husband is still in China, and she is at home with her girls and sends greetings to you. And I wanted to let you know that Connie also is the one who facilitated for us the contact for our private tour that 8 of you will be lucky enough to join through the drawing at the end of the afternoon. Connie serves as an advisor on the Community Outreach Committee at the Hall of Human Origins. And as a member of our advisory board, Connie helps us in many different ways. So thank you, Connie. We'll carry on without you. In fact, I've asked Jennifer to help me here at the podium with some of the questions as we move forward in the afternoon. But now I want to turn to our panelists and present them to you one at a time. I want to introduce each one, but I want you to know the structure of the program as we proceed. We will begin with a question for each one of the panelists in turn. They will take 3 to 4 minutes to respond to this question, and then we will proceed to additional questions, and at the end of this more formal part, they will ask each other some questions based on what they have heard in the responses. And then we will open the program up to questions from the audience, those of you here and those on the internet. So that's the structure that we will follow for the discussion. And those of you online, I think, Gary, you've put up the email address several times, and that will appear, I think, several times subsequent. So those of you downstreaming this, please feel free to participate with your questions as well. Now, our first panelist is Imam Haytham Younis. Haytham is an educator and an architect. He comes to the United States with Syrian heritage, but he spent 12 years in Saudi Arabia studying and is an accomplished and recognized Islamic scholar. Haytham has worked with the Islamic Society of North America and the Islamic Center of Maryland. And the first question, Haytham, that I'll ask you to respond to as the others subsequently, is to please summarize your perception of God, including the role that communicating with God plays in your life, how that informs your self-understanding, what role God plays in your life.
Thank you. Good afternoon. All right, so I thought I was to address also our belief in God and science. I'll try to weave them all in together because, in fact, people who come to Islam, as myself, I was from a Muslim background but not raised with Islam. I happened to discover Islam at the age of 23 after a long period of time of actually being interested in Judaism, which laid the foundation for my understanding the Quran. So people who enter Islam are impressed in two ways, emotionally and also intellectually. Now, emotionally, when Muhammad first recited the Quran, the people of the Arabian Peninsula had no explanation for what he was reciting. It was something that no one had heard before. The beauty and the terseness, the intensity, the power of the words, and the beauty, the rhyme, the beauty. It all was quite unique and quite different. We still consider the Quran today a miracle, a standing miracle, which we hold in our hands. And for any of you who are interested in a new kind of experience, I would recommend that you go on YouTube and listen to the Quran being recited in Arabic, though you won't understand a word, because even the sound of the Quran is quite remarkable and unique. But also, the Quran impresses a person with the intellectual argument that it presents. In fact, the whole of the Quran, I would say, from beginning to end, is a rational argument about the existence of the Creator and the fact that this Creator must be one and only one. So Muslims are quite proud, in fact, of the scientific things that are brought out in the Quran. And as you know, from the very beginning, Islamic civilization, the Muslims were very open to scientific discoveries. And every time they discovered something, they would look back to the Quran and they'd say, yep, there it is. So for us, it's an affirmation that this book is from the Creator. So, for example, the Quran mentions the Big Bang. There's a verse which says, do not the unbelievers see that the universe was once one piece and that God smashed it asunder, and we made from water all living things. In another passage, the Quran mentions that the universe is expanding. Other passages describe the development of the embryo in the womb of the mother, step by step. Things that the people at that time could not have possibly known. God speaks also about the division between salt and fresh water. All of these things which scientists later discovered. So it brings home the importance of the Creator, acknowledging the Creator. And the most important action that a Muslim can do is the prayer. We pray 5 times a day. Without the prayer, one can easily go astray. They lose balance, they lose perspective. Maintaining the prayer is kind of like connecting back into that source of creation, the source of guidance, the source of security, the source of well-being. And so we pray 5 times a day, and it helps us to maintain our balance and our peace, if you will. Now, I don't know what's happening with the nutcases that are going to extreme these days with our religion. It's an extremely discomforting thing for the rest of us to see. There are some explanations that we can bring out, but primarily it is a very, very disappointing thing to see. I should stop at that. Who's next?
Do you want to introduce the next?
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Dennis Skocz, who is a practicing Catholic and a professor of philosophy. He is a student of philosophy and with emphasis on European history, and he's published in a number of academic journals. Dennis has a distinguished career as a diplomat, and this was where he first encountered other cultures, including extensive and ensued his study of Hindu religious practice. And he has continued to work with several agencies in the United States government while teaching and in this area. So Dennis, the same question to you. Please briefly summarize your perspective of God, including the role that God plays in communicating with you in your daily life, and how this informs your self-understanding.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I think that I can, I'm identified as a practicing Catholic. That doesn't say how well I practice my Catholicism, so let me make that amendment. I'm also, I don't speak, the other thing I'm going to say is I don't speak for the Catholic Church. But having said that, I'll say that my religious perspective, my perspective on God, can be organized under 3 points. My faith, and I like to speak of my faith rather than belief, because I'm talking about an existential posture rather than affirmation of certain propositions or doctrines. And you'll see why I've made that distinction when I get into the 3 points. The first is that my faith is experientially based. I'm a teacher of philosophy, and logic in particular is among my courses, but I think that doesn't take us very far. And if you know logic well, you know what I'm talking about. Logic leads us from premises to conclusions. The truth of the premises needs to be explored independently. And I appreciated the distinction that was made between true stories and truth stories. I'm a truth story person, okay? And I think those truth stories come out of experience, our experience with each other, listening to the heart. Emotion is a part of it. And I could talk at length about that, but I'll lay that marker down, and if you want to explore it further, I leave it to you. The second thing is my faith is dialogically based. I borrow a page from Martin Buber in the I-thou relationship. So when you ask me about communication with God, you're asking me about the second point of the basis of my religious, the basis of my faith. I do make a little departure. In fact, I reverse the conventional understanding of prayer. I think most people understand prayer as something you do once you believe in God and once you've understood something about God. I think it's the other way around. I think often we pray first and then we come to know something about God. There's a sense of the thou there, and any time we reach out into the darkness and walk along the edge of the abyss, we're prompted to speak to something that's out there, and then some of us take a leap, and that leap is to attribute personality to that other, and not to think of it entirely as an empty nothingness or a solid object that gives us footing so long as we're walking in that direction. So it's dialogue. And the third thing is I am unabashedly anthropocentric. Now, a member of this panel and others, maybe two members of this panel and others, have taken exception. All three of them. All three of them take exception to that. They think that those who have a fatherly notion of God or a brotherly notion of Jesus Christ are taking human concepts and importing them to a spiritual being. And there's something wrong with that because we're simply seeking comfort in notions that are comfortable to us as human beings. But you see, my relationship to God and my experience of the divine is not one that always gives me comfort. I mean, sometimes I am held guilty by a God who expects a lot of me. Sometimes I feel anger at the injustice that my brothers and sisters feel. Sometimes I hear the needs of those who are around me, although I don't pay much attention to that, to be truthful. Okay, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And in all those situations, I hear the call of God. And in all of those situations, I see not just the Christ, but all of the Christs that all of us are, all of those manifestations of the divine in the human dimension. So to know God in human form is simply to acknowledge the fact that God has taken human form. It's not that I give him human form. It is that the God that I know is one who takes on our burdens, takes on our needs, and presents himself in so many different faces. I'll leave it at that. I think I've probably used my 3.5 minutes, and hope that some of you will ask me more about this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Our next panelist is Dan Spiro, who is a Jew and a co-founder and coordinator of the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society of Washington and the Washington Spinoza Society, and the author of some books, which are out on the back table for those of you who might be interested later. He has published works on the role of religion in public schools, and he blogs as the empathetic rationalist. He is a Zionist, as you will discover, working for peace in the Middle East, and he spends his time working as a public interest lawyer combating corporate fraud. So, Dan, the same question to you. Please briefly summarize your perspective on God, including the role that communicating with God plays in your life and informs your self-understanding.
So I see God as great, meaning infinitely large. And I see this world as being in God, not as a place where the force of God and other forces interact against each other. And I see God's nature as a mystery. For everything we know about God, there are infinite number of things I believe we don't know and can't know. But I distinguish between the true God, the divine mystery, and the name of God. The name of God is a word, it's ours. It's a tool. And like other powerful tools, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Now, this name has a denotation and a common connotation. What it denotes is the ultimate. So sometimes you'll hear people saying that such and so's God is money or power. Why? Because that person's ultimate concern is money or power. But we also say those are false gods because everybody really knows that money and power are not what is truly ultimate. By contrast, the most common connotation of the name comes from the scriptural character who's omni-excellent in every way, and it's essentially the human ideal. So typically, when people use a word like snake, they talk about the denotation, an animal that slithers, a reptile that slithers, rather than the most common connotation, which is, a sneak who practices my profession. I wish that when people talk about the divine, the name, that they talk about the denotation, the ultimate. Because if they did, I don't think we'd have so much fighting about religion. We'd have more open-mindedness about religion. Now, personally, I don't have any problem with people who anthropomorphize God, but I don't care to do it myself, something about that I-thou relationship that Dennis was talking about. My favorite connotation of God does not resemble a human being. What's ultimate to me? I see this world as a bubbling plenitude consisting of infinite variety. I'm stealing from Franz Rosenzweig there. And I also infer an overarching unity, tying together every body and mind. So you have the ultimate is the synthesis between the two, the ground of being that underlies everything that exists, and the life of being that includes everything that was, is, and will be. They're both ultimate, but when you put them together, you get the ultimate synthesis, the synthesis of ultimates. And that to me is God. And there is nothing outside of God if it's conceived that way. God includes nature as we know it, and God includes what transcends nature as we know it. Now, some might say that my conception of God is too abstract to form a relationship with God. I reject that. I enjoy praying, meaning talking to God. I enjoy going to shul. I frequently talk to God outside of shul. And as far as what God says to me, everything that happens in this world is God talking to me and you. That's how I see God. My new book, Liberating the Holy Name, is organized in 3 parts. God in the third person, God in the second person, and God in the first person. And the second part, me talking to God, is sort of the heart and soul of the book. It reveals my innermost feelings about God. But it's really also an argument, because a lot of my traditional brothers and sisters will say, you have to anthropomorphize God in order for God to have meaning for human beings. And I reject that, and I think in my book I disprove that. I'm not here to criticize traditional religion, but only to criticize the idea that traditional approaches to faith should monopolize faith.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. And our final panelist is John Schuch. John is a humanist and president of Partners for Secular Activism. And he is also an instructor in philosophy at the University of Buffalo. John served as president of the Society of Humanist Philosophers and is also a published author. He sold out all of his books earlier today, so we will have to talk to John about getting them in some other fashion other than on the back table. But John, you've heard these responses from your colleagues. The same question to you. Please briefly summarize your perspective of God and indicate what role communicating with God plays in your life.
Sure. So I'm the unabashed atheist, meaning I guess I'm willing to accept the A word in public, which is true. I'm unabashed about that. But it also has overtones of arrogant, and we are acquainted with arrogant atheists. But the atheism I represent is not the latest fashionable secularism. Let us make a distinction. Those who need to hate upon religion and defend it with all the political power and attack it with all the political powers of the state and ridicule it with these powerful forces, that's secularism. I'm here representing atheism, an ancient way of thinking skeptically about the ultimate that has independently arisen in every civilization that ever put thought to paper. And this position is not arrogant. It's the very opposite. Atheists are saying, well, you know, we doubt. We're not sure. We don't think that there is a God. Well, how could you know? How could you prove? God is a mystery. God is ultimate. God is perfect. God is infinite. Okay, but if God is such a mystery, why are you claiming so much knowledge about it? Us atheists acknowledge mystery. We have little difficulty telling when science stops. Scientists have little difficulty telling when science stops. That's why they keep pushing outwards with their questions into the mysteries. It is reasonable to acknowledge the existence of mystery. It is unreasonable to say that there is mystery and then proceed to hand out your scriptures telling people everything that is known about this mystery. You can't have it both ways. You just can't. So atheism is the only consistent position about mystery. There is mystery, and thereafter we must be silent. Perspectives on God, the atheist perspective on God is precisely that. There are many perspectives on God, and they are all human created. Sure, you can't deal with, intellectually or emotionally, utter, complete mystery. You can't talk about it, and you can't whistle it either. So what that means is that you have to erect something that you can communicate with, something that you can deal with, and that's why there are so many religions. If you want to know what it's like to be an atheist, it's very simple. Imagine why it is you feel so reasonable for not believing in the existence of Zeus. The reason why you don't believe in the existence of Zeus is the exact same reason why I don't believe in the existence of your God. In fact, we have a great deal in common. You and I do not believe in almost all of the gods that have ever been worshipped by humanity. I just believe in one less God than you do. We have so much in common, really. So religions are built to communicate, but not with God, with each other. Religions tell us a great deal of wisdom about each other, and that is valuable wisdom so long as it doesn't overreach and you don't force me to kneel where you do.
Thank you. We will move on to our second question, and we'll ask Dennis to start this one and then the others of you to follow him. So we all believe in pluralism and interfaith work, but that is not to say we never get frustrated by other people's attitudes. I mean, I believe in Zeus. I'm just kidding. If you view yourself as a believer, what is it that you find most frustrating about the attitudes of non-believers? And if you view yourself as a non-believer, what is it that you find most troubling about the attitudes of believers? So we'll start with Dennis.
I think this is a moment for a truth story. Okay, I was in Windsor, Canada, which is right across from Detroit, for a conference of the North American Sartre Society. Now, Jean-Paul Sartre, as most of you know, was a French existentialist, and he says in one of his writings, which is a talk that he gave in 1947, that French existentialism of his variety is working out the consequences of atheism. I had no problem, I'm a member of the North American Sartre Society, I have no problem participating in it, and Sartre is one of three atheists at this point that I respect a great deal. The other one is Nietzsche, and the third one is John Shook at the end of this table. And what's common to all three is that they think it's a big deal whether you believe or not believe in God. It's such a big deal that it forms the basis of French existentialism that Sartre doesn't. And the same thing is true of Nietzsche. I can go into that. And I think our friend John Schuck here considers this an important question as well. So what frustrates me about non-believers is not so much people who confront this phenomenon. Let's just call it that. It's that that so many people in our society are indifferent to religion. What happened at the North American Sartre Society was a panel on religion, and in that panel, somebody read some statistics about belief, and compared the level of religious affiliation, belief. There were several measures used in the developed and undeveloped countries in the world, and the least amount of faith in anything religious was among those countries, the highly industrialized countries, and especially the highly industrialized countries that had a high level of social welfare programs. And I went into a funk for 2 hours. We were talking all this French existentialism stuff for 2 or 3 days. But it took these statistics to put me into a funk. And what did it was the thought that there are people out there who live very comfortable lives and have comfortably provided for the people who might otherwise not be able to support themselves. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, don't misunderstand me. But somehow they're missing the depth that's provided by a sense of the abyss, the sense that there is an edge to even a spherical world in a curved space. Okay, the idea that there's there's something more than shopping at box stores in shopping malls, huh? That the kind of realization that is provided by the question, why are there things rather than nothing at all? Or Peggy Lee's song, is that all there is? Is that all there is? Okay, well, if that is all there is, do we do what Peggy Lee suggests? Then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. Is that all there is? So anyway, that's what upsets me, not so much by unabashed atheists like John or people like Jean-Paul Sartre, Friedrich Nietzsche. It's this sense of, I'm satisfied, I'm happy, I'm doing my duty to the people that don't have something. And so I think I would say that's my answer to the question.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I see the interfaith movement as critical to making religion a unifying, progressive force in our society. And I see humanists as people who should be in that movement. I come from, on my mother's side, generations of atheist Jews who are humanistic, and I was raised to be sympathetic to humanism. But do I have frustrations with non-believers and non-belief? Yes, I do. Okay, so I'll give you a couple. First of all, I'm not so much turned off when people are simply apathetic about religion, but when they are proud of their apathy. I look back at myself when I was a kid, and of course I was an atheist, and I was nevertheless intrigued by religion. I was intrigued by what religion was doing for some of the people that I knew, and how enchanted it made life for them. So the pilot light was on for me. But today I see so many people who look down their noses at religion, like they have no interest, and they should have no interest. And I can compare that to myself. I have no interest in dance. I don't like to do it, and I don't like to watch it. I don't like modern dance. I don't like old kinds of dancing, none of it. But I don't feel proud of that. Why would I be proud? That's my problem. That's not dance's problem. So why are people proud of being apathetic about religion? It's a great domain of human existence. It's not something to be proud of blowing that whole thing off. Number two. Let's get back to the way the name of God is defined. Non-believers will commonly take the scriptural character, this omni-excellent, miracle-working deity, and decide that this character doesn't exist. Well, I agree with them. So do many, if not most, contemporary rabbis. So what? But they take the next step commonly, and they say there is no God because the name can only refer to that conception. And that's the attitude that drives me nuts. Because the name is so powerful to those who believe. Why would we want to cede all that power to religious fundamentalists? It's one thing for a fundamentalist who loves the name, right? It's a beloved, to say, this is God. I get that. I respect that. They're witnessing. But why would a free thinker agree with them and say that the fundamentalist should be allowed to define God for the rest of us, meaning out of existence? I find that to be a dangerous and polarizing perspective, one that creates a world of non-religious people and fundamentalist religious people. And we've seen the impact of that kind of polarization in politics. It is not healthy in politics. It is not healthy in religion. I want to see bridges built between non-believers and traditionalists, free thinkers and traditionalists. I want to see us all liberate the name so that we can be engaged in a common activity, which is to explore the meaning of the ultimate, whatever that means. I think that can enlighten us, it can unify us, and it can get us to embrace our differences rather than to fear them.
So the question is, what is it about non-believers that bothers you? But my problem is that I'm just as bothered by the believers as I am the non-believers. In fact, I'm bothered by everybody. So it was 1,400 years after Moses that John and Jesus came along and were telling the children of Israel, look, you're missing the boat. This is not what God meant. Now it has been 1,400 years after Muhammad, and part of our messianic prophecies, as not in the Quran but from the sayings of Muhammad, is that Jesus the Messiah will return. We have that belief as well. So I'm thinking, everybody's thinking, well, when the Messiah comes, he's going to be on our side. I think he's going to have some choice words for all of us. And I think that what's going to end up happening is he's going to say to us, the Muslims, a lot of things. This is not what God said. This is not what God intended. Sadly, we are taking the letter of the law and missing the spirit entirely. And I think that there's some excuse for that. I mean, at the end of World War I, the Muslim world was, at least the Arab world was conquered and divided by the Europeans. And after that, they had dictatorships over them. So there's been a stifling of freedom of Islamic knowledge. And so Muslims are, on the one hand, ignorant. On the other hand, very frustrated. They're very frustrated. They're carrying a big stick on their shoulders. So they react in knee-jerk reactions, doing things which are not prescribed by the Book of God nor the sayings of the Prophet. So the thing that bothers me about the non-believers, and in this context I'm going to say non-believers are just those who don't believe in Islam, whereas there are many people who don't believe in Muhammad but believe in God, and they are believers in God. But the non-Muslims, if you will, what bothers me is that for centuries now, it's not just a recent thing after 9/11, but for centuries, they've been trying to portray Islam as if it has nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with Abraham. And I think that there are reasons for that, but it's very sad. So take, for example, the name of God in Arabic, Allah. They say, oh, Muslims don't worship God, they worship Allah, right? But in Hebrew, the name of God, one of the names of God that is used quite often is Elohim. The I am is a suffix. The root word for God is Elohah in Hebrew. In Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, the name of God is Allah. So you have Elohah, Allah, Allah. It's the same Semitic deity. But there's always been this kind of distancing, pushing Islam away, making it seem as if it is different. Yet if a person picks up a translation of the Quran and reads it, they will be surprised to see how much it reads like God speaking in the Bible as well. Now, there are a lot of people being paid a lot of money these days. Ever since 9/11, they just kind of came right out of the woodwork, and they have this agenda. They're just as evil, in my mind, as the extremists on the other side. They have essentially the same agenda as the extremists on the other side. They want to mix it up. They want to see a clash of cultures. They want to see animosity. They want to see fighting. They want to see war. And so they go around taking passages of the Quran out of context, mistranslating them to make it seem as if things like forced conversions or killing people because they don't happen to be of our faith, that these are things that are authentically from Islam, which they are not. In closing, I mentioned before that I kind of came to Islam from nothing. I was not exposed to it growing up. And so my experience is very much like other converts to Islam. And I can tell you that at least with regards to converts in America, and of course every culture has an impact, on how a person approaches a tradition. So we, the converts to Islam, when we first are exposed to the Quran or the teachings of Muhammad, we don't see in it a faith that teaches belligerence and hatred. In fact, what we see in it is a faith that reconciles us with the rest of those who believe in God, particularly the Jews and Christians. All of a sudden a person says, oh, I see. So I can believe in Moses, I can be a follower of Moses. I can believe in Jesus in a slightly different sense than the Trinitarian concept of Jesus. And I can believe in Muhammad, and all of these traditions come from the same God. So it's a kind of unifying, reconciling, peaceful thing which results.
So if I remember correctly, talking about interfaith dialogue, and I think this is important. I agree with Daniel on so much, and much of what some of the others have said. I'll give an atheist perspective. We're often asked, well, where do you get morality from, right? So if you doubt that the ultimate is sorting and arranging, if you doubt that any of us are entitled to think that they know our ranking or who's more meritorious than somebody else and so on and so forth, if you have no way of telling any of this, there's only one logically consistent default position. We are all absolutely equal. And that is the foundation of humanist ethics, from which you can derive pretty much what you would expect to be deriving: peace, social justice, progress and welfare for all of humanity, no one left out, no one left behind. That just automatically follows. It's not easy, and as we know, every civilization has to work out details in its own way, but nevertheless, this is the fundamental core, and it's not mysterious how you can get there from atheism. So why should humanism be included in interfaith dialogue for democracy and peace? Well, why should it be excluded? The point of interfaith, I suppose, is more than just chatting up each other's faiths and having a podium to declare that, of course, one faith is better than the rest for finding peace and justice, which I find a tedious feature of much of interfaith discussion. They're trying to outdo each other as to whose God is more on the side of peace rather than actually talking about achieving it, but I will let that pass. If there is no criteria at the door for which God you have to believe in, then why leave atheists out? Why should we have to meet a criteria for believing in a God? If you are on the side of peace, social justice, and a democracy. So I think that atheists need to get off these pompous, arrogant sidelines that they think they're somehow above it all. They're in the middle of it like everybody else, and if they're feeling privileged, they ain't. If they're feeling safe and secure, they are not. Justice denied anywhere is justice denied everywhere. And I think that is a humanist creed that requires no prior faith in God. So in a sense, it's the purest creed for all of humanity.
Thank you so much. We're going to move to a question. We're going to start with Dan on this one. And it is Evolution Weekend. So, how do you see the relationship between science and religion? And how, for example, does your religious philosophy deal with the theory of evolution? We'll start with Dan and then move around as we do.
So as a progressive philosophical Jew, I think that my faith inspires me to seek the truth wherever and whenever I can find it. Even when I was at an Orthodox yeshiva, I learned that one of the synonyms for Torah is truth. Of course, I also learned there that if you open your mind too much, your brains will fall out. I don't buy into that because I actually as a religious Jew, I feel commanded to do certain things, and one of the things I feel commanded to do is to follow the truth. So I have to follow it wherever. Accordingly, I tend to follow the dictates of science in those instances where I subjectively think that science has spoken definitively. And believe me, I am not scientistic. I don't think the scientific method can explain all the secrets of the universe. I think there are so many domains that are beyond science. I subscribe to what Spinoza said, that God has infinite attributes, of which we know two: extension and thought. So think about that, folks. It means that our whole reality, everything we can perceive, conceive, or whatever, is just a speck compared to what we can't. But when it comes to something like the theory of evolution, where there seems to be plenty of empirical evidence to support it, I accept that this theory comports more with reality than, say, the literal meaning of the book of Genesis. Now, lately, I have been noticing just how much I believe in science, because I've been going through one of the worst times of my life. My 93-year-old mother broke her hip in December. She's had 4 inpatient stays. Since then, I don't have to say more. And I keep wanting to, I keep thinking about, how much happier would I be if I thought that there is a God who might answer prayers and perform miracles. But instead, I find myself saying, what does the medical profession say about this, the condition? What sort of treatment do they say is optimal? And what is the scientific basis for their recommendations? And then I say something else. I cannot ask those questions about those miracles, because for me, I haven't gotten to that belief in those kinds of miracles. Not so defined. And I can't lie to myself, even if it would make me happy to do so. That, to me, is practicing religion. I'm not saying everybody has to practice that type of religion, but that is a way of practicing progressive Judaism.
So the atheist position on science and religion is that they cannot contradict each other. And the reason is because religion is, in its intrinsic nature, incompetent to stand as any sort of rival to science. So there is no warfare because only one side occupies the field. That is not to say that science should take itself to be the absolute truth. Science provides objective truths as best it can. It says when it understands something, and most importantly, it says when it doesn't understand something, unlike religion. So, religion seeks absolute truths for the psychological comfort of the believers. This is faith. Science seeks objective understanding of nature insofar as humanity can reach out into it. Religion needs science. Science does not need religion. The relationship is asymmetrical. The reason is because religion needs science, because if religion is going to set up communal relationships, social relationships between humanity and nature, it had better know what it is dealing with. Otherwise, it will be errant nonsense at best and a dogmatic, swift trip off the cliff at worst. So we had all better listen to science first. Now, it is also often said that the realm of values is at least insulated from science. That also is now nonsense. That last wall of convenient separation from the Enlightenment age has also come down. It shall be science which says how human beings are capable of anthropologically dealing with each other and ethically managing each other's business. It is figuring out how the brain does morality, just as it's figuring out how the brain does art and dance and mathematics and everything else. So what this means is that religion operates on a social field, and it should stick to what it does best, namely archiving, preserving, and transmitting the wisdom that is accumulated by the many civilizations, agreeing where it can and converging where it must, for we are one species. The wisdom does not converge by coincidence. We are living in a similar habitat. However, we'd better stay focused on the future, which means we had better apply our wisdom to dealing what is coming at us with freight train speed. Instead, what we see are the religions bickering over each other about who can kill each other the fastest to get each other to hell, or deciding that they need to fight it out over what happened 1,500 or 2,000 or some arbitrary number of years ago as we race toward the cliff.
Me? Okay. Well, with regards to the issue of evolution, I've kind of been scared away from the whole subject. Yeah, by my 21-year-old. He's studying to be a lawyer, and he believes in God. He says, yeah, for sure I believe in God. Not believing in God is stupid, he says. But he's absolutely sure about evolution, and I really don't know how to handle it. So he kind of scares me away. Every now and then I'll find an article on Facebook, and I'll email it to him, and I'll say, huh? And he'll say, Dad, did you read this article? It's really stupid, you know. And yeah, ultimately I'll just withdraw, you know, and close the fence and just say, look, I believe in Adam and Eve. Just leave me alone, please. So it's a topic that I really have to delve into. But as far as I mentioned before, the earliest Islamic civilizations, there was a keen interest in science, because the Quran is bringing forth reasoned arguments and scientific arguments as well for the existence of a creator. So, for example, it says everything that is in the heavens and everything that is on the earth is a sign for those who have intellect to consider. The food that you eat, the water that you drink, the trees, the mountains, the seas, the rivers, the air that you breathe, the fact that you are created as male and female, your hearing and your sight. Hearing is mentioned first because that's actually what develops first in the embryo, and then your sight. All of these things are a sign that there is a creator. So God says in the Quran several times, if you examine the heavens and the earth, look for any kind of break or any kind of fault, any kind of shortcoming, any kind of incongruence, and you will never find it. So therefore, believe in your Creator. Sometimes it puts it very simply by saying, how can you disbelieve in God when you were without life and He gave you life? So it can be a very simple argument. In fact, sometimes God says that if you, O Muhammad, speak to the idolaters, and you ask them, who created the heavens and the earth? They will say, God. Then you say to them, so why are you distracted? Why can you not obey God? Why do you not fear God, since you understand that there is a creator? It is presented as the most basic, intrinsic thing that a human being already understands, and it needs no argument. One verse in the Quran says, can there really be any doubt about God? So the understanding in Islam is that, and we have a day of judgment, we have a heaven and hell, we have salvation by grace, is that any person living at any time in the history of humankind, in any part of the world, whether they had read a book or not, whether they had heard of a prophet or not, or any teacher, any guru, already knows inside him or herself, intrinsically, that all of this comes from something higher, that there is purpose, that there's intellect, that there's a creator behind all of this. It is instinctive in the human being. And so therefore, the word for unbelief in Arabic, the word is kufr, it means to cover. The word kufr means to cover. So the person who denies the creator entirely, there can't be any creator whatsoever, which I don't think John is saying, is actually covering or hiding something which they intrinsically already feel. The universality of this concept is another sign, another indication that there is a creator. In every culture, there's the understanding or the idea that there is that one creator. And so it is kind of a unifying force, if you will. True monotheism doesn't divide human beings, it unifies them. Because someone may call God Elohim, Someone may call God Allah. Someone may call God, as a particular tribe living in the Amazon, Ugatami, which means the Most High, but or the Native Americans, the Great Spirit. As long as they are referring to that one source of creation who calls human beings to their higher purpose of doing good, then they are talking about the same God. When there's one and only one God, then no matter what name you give that God, you are talking about the same God. Did I get off track?
Okay, well, I have no problem with, I have no religious problem with evolution. And I don't think my church does. I'm not going to speak officially for them, but as far back as St. Augustine of Hippo, Augustine was saying, well, it's not what we now say a literal truth that when God says first day, or when Genesis says first day, second day, we're not necessarily talking about a calendar day. And I think for many, many decades, if not a century or more, the Catholic Church has been speaking in terms that suggest that that evolution may be one of the ways in which God accomplishes his creation. My problem with evolution, yeah, I do have one. My problem with evolution is philosophical. And I guess I have problems with the whole notion of chance in evolution. It seems to be common to the various forms, and there are many forms of evolution, Darwinian, and I'm sure you know them better than I do. Einstein says, and he was speaking of quantum physics, which has this element of chance as well in the uncertainty principle. He says God doesn't play dice. And from that I come up with one version of my version of evolution, and that is that yes, God does play dice, but the dice are loaded. Before these chance events take place, there are predispositions in natural reality itself that tend to favor a certain outcome. Now, I may be reading the record incorrectly, but when Bergson talks about creative evolution, and by the way, he's not talking about a creator there, he's talking about what the ancients defined as physis, or nature, and that is that there is an internal principle of being or motion in nature that defines what nature is. I think that's the kind of evolution that I would buy into philosophically. Or when Stuart Kaufman of the Santa Fe Institute, sometime resident and scholar at the Santa Fe Institute, talks about being at home in the world, talks in being at home in the world, that's the title of the book, about evolution. He moves in the direction, I think, again, I'm not a scientist, and so I'm reading a mysterious scripture here, but I think he's talking in terms of chaos theory, emergent reality of something in the phenomena of nature itself, which again leads us along a certain path, totally responsive to random events outside there in the environment. The other problem that I have with evolution is, again, primarily a philosophical problem, maybe entirely a philosophical problem, and that's the tendency of evolution, like other current intellectual trends, to become a doctrine of its own. And to make skeptics like myself and would-be philosophers of science like myself feel inhibited to talk about the reservations that we have about the theory, or because we're believers to be said to have these ideas because we're really secretly trying to bring God in by the back door or through the gaps. I don't think he needs to be brought in through the gaps. He's everywhere. Anyway, the tendency to make it into a doctrine, and I see this tendency, and evolution as part of this tendency, taking place in what is one of the big debates of our time, and that's the debate between social constructivists and evolutionists who make common cause with neurobiologists, and they say, is race, is sexual orientation, or are these simply social constructs? And to believe that, and to read the social constructs without any debate with the evolutionists is to be left with the impression that, well, everything, in fact, some of them, the radical social constructivists, say everything is a social construction. Race, sexual orientation, Things that you think are obviously biological are social constructs. Now, on the other hand, you have the evolutionists, and that's why it's good to read these two doctrinaire positions side by side. The evolutionists say, well, no, all these things are there already in the genes. When you play the philosophy game over a number of years, and I have, you begin to take you begin to turn down the heat. You begin to let your own reservations enter in your own questions. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I hope this is not a disappointment. I actually think that a lot of the things that were said at the beginning before we started our discussion are spot on. The whole thing about truth, scientific truth, and religious truth. But I share these other thoughts with you, hoping that maybe they resonate with those of you who are talking about evolution. Maybe you can tell me, maybe you can answer my questions.
Just a quick shout out to our web audience. Thank you for those of you who did join us by the web link. And just a reminder, if you'd like to, any of you who are tweeting to your friends here about how they can get connected here to this marvelous forum, it is www.wesnex.org. That's how they can get to the live web stream. A reminder also that the email address is evolutionweekendmd, that's all one string, evolutionweekendmd@gmail.com. And then my son, who is sitting back here, who is way younger than I am, said, "You don't have a Facebook event?" So he created one, and it is, as we were talking, went live. And those of you who communicate by Facebook, and I'm showing my age, you can send a question in also by facebook.com/EvolveMD.
Can we access the internet here?
From your cell phones?
The Baltimore Washington Conference public Wi-Fi. Just type in guest 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Someone obviously works here.
All right.
Guest is the username.
So those of you in the audience can use your cards to begin to submit the questions. As we collect those and get them organized, I want to introduce Bill Meisch, who is a member of our Wesley Nexus Board of Directors and a pastor in the conference. And Bill is going to serve as our interlocutor for the panel and ask the first question. The rest of you, please get your questions on the cards and get them submitted to us, so we'll get to as many of them as possible. Bill brings a terrific background to our board and has been very, very helpful to us in the last couple of years that he has joined us. So, Bill, come up and ask the panel the first question of the afternoon.
Thanks, Maynard. I have been so impressed at hearing how you all have occupied your position so eloquently. It really is amazing, and it's helped me to be able to see the difference in how you approach the panel work today. My question for you has to do with story. When we move from the fact of science into sacred scriptures or authoritative scriptures, we often use story as a bridge to be able to get from one to the other. As you look at story from your context, do you see a commonality that can exist across your positions? And that's for any of you.
Well, I'm into story. I really dig what y'all said about truth stories and true stories. So let me start with that. I don't see it as so much a bridge to religion. It is the language of religion. Now, when I say story, in Greek, the word for story, and that's all it means, and that's quite a bit, is mythos. And we've taken myth, and we've taken, and not your anthropologists today, but I mean in the day, back when anthropology was getting its start, a lot of them thought of these things as primitive relics, in so much as they survived into then contemporary times. I think that's how we acquire wisdom. So all of my fellow panelists have heard me say this before, but I'm for thick religion. Clifford Geertz, among others, Clifford Geertz, the anthropologist, has talked about thick cultures, ones that are layered and layered and layered with meaning. And so the more stories, the better, and that's what I like about Hinduism. It's what I've found in ancient Greek pagan culture and religion. It's the idea that abstract concepts only take you so far. You need to dance, Dan, because that's one of our first responses to the divine, and that goes across cultures, as I'm sure John Shook will document. So that probably hasn't answered everything, but I'll let it stand.
Yeah, I do think story is a unifying force, or at least it can and should be. Of course, what you do with the stories can then be divisive, but the idea that the stories in scriptures, all the scriptures, can be beloved, can be inspiring, informative, transformative, this is what can unify us. I look back in my own life. I wanted to write a book about the essence of Judaism as I understood it. And so what did I do? I turned back to the Torah. I turned back to stories. And I asked, a lot of Christians know the phrase, what would Jesus do? Well, I wrote a book about what would Moses do. It's all about the life of a contemporary rabbi, sort of, who patterns himself after Moses. But what did I call the book? Moses the Heretic. Now, somebody else might look at that and say, wait a minute, you're reading these stories, and how come your Moses is a heretic? Because I guess a lot of my Jewish philosophy is, from an Orthodox standpoint, heretical. So when we take these stories, these beloved stories about these beloved characters, and we do different things with them, that's where divisions can come up. My philosophy, however, is if God is the ultimate, and if our search is for, to learn more about the ultimate and opening our eyes to different traditions, then there is no reason why we have to hate each other if we come up with different understandings of what Moses was about or what Abraham was about. But, it's easier said than done. So it's unifying, but it has the potential to be divisive.
I would agree with that, and I would add that, of course, stories are essential. It's how you convey wisdom. It's how you convey an ethos and an ethics. We're the only species on the planet that makes up stories and then believes them. But there's belief, and then there's belief, and there are higher powers. We also create them. They can be exploited for political and tribalistic purposes. This is the dark side of what it takes in order to operate cultures. They can be hijacked and parasitically manipulated, and people can be taught the stories and then taught that they're unworthy of achieving human excellence according to the stories because they must submit to a God first, and unless you submit to the right God, you'll never achieve human goodness, much less human excellence. Right? And so now things are at a real difficulty. You've got the religions at each other's throats, and people have forgotten that the real origins of the stories is us, and we should take responsibility and we should take the credit for them. There is human goodness possible. There is human excellence possible. We done it. We did it ourselves, and we should take credit for it. Instead, we have a lot of belief systems saying you're not entitled to take any credit for it. You are the fallen, and you can't get up without some story telling you the right God and the right way to kneel first before you stand up. And this is ethically divisive, and I think we need to get past it and just focus on the ethics.
So with regards to the Quran, stories, of course, are very important, and they are both unifying and divisive. because there are a lot of stories that are very much in common with the Bible, aligned with things that are told in the Bible. In fact, I had an Orthodox Jewish friend, actually modern Orthodox Jewish friend. One day he emailed me out of the blue and he said, I've come to the conclusion that Muhammad could not have made up this religion because he knows too many details of the law and things that happened that are documented in our book. So it must be the same God who communicated to Moses. A lot of the stories are the same, and that's part of why a Muslim feels so endeared to people like Moses and Jesus, and we feel that we are followers of Moses and Jesus. The prophet that is mentioned more often in the Quran than anyone else is Moses, and a lot of his story with Pharaoh, his interaction with Pharaoh, and even before God called him to be a prophet, is there. However, there's also the story of the sacrifice of Abraham. And in that story, it is made quite clear that Ishmael was also included in the covenant, something which Jewish interpreters of the Torah would say, no, Ishmael was not included in the covenant. And of course, that's very significant because Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael. With regards to Jesus, we have the virgin birth mentioned, that an angel came to Mary and told her, you will have a son. She says, how will I have a son when no man has touched me? And the angel says, God creates whatever he wills. And the miracles of Jesus, the raising of the dead and the healing of the blind and the lepers. The fact that Jesus returns, that's not so much mentioned. It is intimated in the Quran briefly, but it comes mostly from the sayings of Prophet Muhammad. Yet, at the same time, of course, the difference being that here you have Jesus in the Quran saying, worship God alone. He is the only God. He is my Lord and your Lord. And so, in essence, denying that deity status. Sometimes we are confronted with Christians who would say, well, either Jesus was telling the truth or he was a liar. And our position is, well, there's a third position that he was telling the truth, but it's not the truth that you necessarily interpret it as after Jesus, after Paul, essentially. So the stories are very important, and they're both unifying and divisive.
Thank you. If you have any questions that you'd like to write down, just hold them up, and someone will come around and pick them up. The first one we have for you all is novelty and emergence are major themes in the current science and religion dialogue. How do you understand these two concepts from your perspective?
Let me just mention that we only have about 20 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions. We'll get through as many as we can, but if you can keep your answers succinct, that would be great.
Easy question.
Well, things that are new are surprising. They're not anticipated. I like to think of religion as not belonging in the category of because of, but in the category of things in spite of. In spite of my sinful condition, I am saved. In spite of the absurdity of the world, the historic world, it is redeemed. So I think novelty is part of what religion is all about.
I guess I believe in a balance. I believe in these eternal ideas. I believe in notions that what we think we know can in fact be transcended because our perceptions are limited, balanced with that we have to keep our minds open, we have to keep our eyes open, and that we have to build our knowledge, one scientific truth at a time, one epiphany at a time. So, yeah, religion should be about wisdom, and wisdom should be about balance.
Well, my view is that theology, having run out of original ideas about 600 years ago on the planet, is now grasping at any scientific straw it can. So science shocked by quantum holism, therefore Jesus, or crystals, or astrology, or whatever's on sale down in your self-help section. So listen to science very carefully. When science is surprised, take science very seriously. But too much theology is now predicated on trying to get lay people to be suspicious of science and think science has limitations. It's science itself discovering new scientific truths about nature. And when science is surprised, no one should be surprised, because the enterprise of science is, of course, about trying to discover what is new. Theology, yeah, it's probably mostly about trying to reconfirm what is old. Theology hasn't had a new empirical, theoretical confirmation yeah, you're right, I can't write, no. So, yeah, pay attention to science.
If you feel compelled to respond and haven't, do it. You don't have to. We can move to the next question. Okay. The next question. John Shook spoke of humankind's race toward the cliff. Could he explain what that entails? And any other panelists who wish to speak to it, do they also believe we are in a race to the cliff, which I assume means the possible human extinction due to catastrophic climate change?
Oh yeah, I got all very dramatic. I don't know if, how far away the cliff is. I listen to science, and, if we need to make adjustments, we'll make adjustments along the way. But what we also need to do is to make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable first. The first world is, of course, doing the most damage to the planet and paying the least for that damage. I think that's an ethical off the cliff in and of itself, regardless of what actual fate the planet may have. So I think we need to take care of each other, because if we don't, the disaster will sooner or later come to all of us. So I think we had better get our priorities straight. Regardless, if one cliff suddenly appears to be not so much, it'll be something else. We're doing a tremendous number of things to the planet all at once. This is going to be an unpredictable future, so I think humanity had better really get a grip on its priorities. And that was the point of my message.
I don't know if we're heading towards the cliff, but I do know that I disagree with the statement earlier about the consequences of climate change will be felt first on the coasts. I think the suggestion was in America. No, I actually expect a lot of people in places like Africa, in the middle of Africa, to pass away from what I consider to be this horrendous nightmare. And I have to take a shot at religion, since I took a shot at non-belief before. A lot of people feel that because of God, they can put our welfare in God's hands, maybe concentrate on enjoying their life, being with their family, tending to their garden, and let the good Lord take care of everything else. I'm sorry I never did get into Zionism and peace issues, but I do think my faith compels me to work for peace. My faith compels me to work for justice. My faith compels me to work for truth. My faith compels me to work my butt off. That's why I'm a lawyer and a blogger, a full-time lawyer, litigator, and a blogger and a philosopher, et cetera, because if we want to do something about this world, we have to get busy. On the other hand, religion can often be an impetus for, we can relax, we can be happy. Here, Dennis and I totally agree. We can be happy, and we don't have to worry about certain things. Climate change is one of the things that are happening while we sleep. So yeah, I don't know if we're at the abyss. I personally think we will survive this, but I don't want to see a lot of corpses who wouldn't have to die if we got busy.
Oh, wait.
Wait, what was the question?
Do you think we're in a race?
Oh, yes. The cliff. Okay. Yes. So we have a lot of sayings of the prophet, which talk about this period of time and the apocalypse. Now, the apocalypse is not the end of the world, although that follows afterwards. The apocalypse, the word in Greek, means a revealing of knowledge that was there but was hidden, and so that is when Jesus returns. But in essence, yes, according to things that Prophet Muhammad said, we would be in this situation where this clash of civilizations is about to occur. A one-world government and all of the things that entails and what that is based on, which is actually anti-faith, more materialism, and the wealth being concentrated in the hands of a few. So Jesus comes essentially to rescue mankind from that. and to establish the law of God, which is really the only way that mankind can be saved. Now, part of that is, for example, the abolishment of something which is forbidden in both the Bible and the Quran, and that is usury, interest, the means by which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That has to be abolished, and so we believe that Jesus will abolish it. And also there's a certain percentage which is due from people who have extra wealth that they don't spend, and that is given to those who are needy, distributed to those who need it. So according to Muhammad, when Jesus, peace be upon him, I should say, when Jesus returns, he will establish justice in the world and peace to the degree that no one will be hungry, there will be no more oppression, there will be no more warfare either. And he will make the earth, in the words of Muhammad, he will make the earth as if it was a piece of the Garden of Paradise. So our understanding is that left alone to his own machinations and of course the digression of misunderstanding God's intent, after a period of time, mankind is bound to head towards a cliff or two. But at the critical moment, when it is necessary and when it is appropriate, God will intervene in order to save us once again.
And hold that microphone. Oh, were you going to respond, Dennis?
No.
Okay. Hold that microphone. This question is for you. You affirm a positive view of evolution, but in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Pakistan, in the madrasas, Darwin is vilified, and in the school textbooks, Darwin is pictured together as the brother of Satan. Can the educational system in the Muslim world be reformed? This is actually quite a political question.
Well, actually, see, this is why I stay away from the subject of evolution, because I don't quite understand I think that there's a difference between saying that there's a process of natural selection, which a number of Muslim scholars have addressed as being quite valid in the sense that it doesn't contradict the Quran nor the sayings of the Prophet. The Prophet mentioned that human beings in the past lived for different lengths of time, and their heights and things. Obviously, the variations in our colors and our features, having all of us come from one male and one female, that's a process of natural selection, if you will, a process of evolution. But certainly the thing that they sneer about is the idea that we came from monkeys. Now, my son will say that, we have so much in common with monkey DNA. And my response, being a layman, very uneducated layman with regards to this subject, is that, well, God created every creature that occupies this earth in order to function on this earth. And so therefore you see, even other animals, they'll have two eyes and a nose and ears and a mouth. And so, it's part of that creation of God fitting into this environment, if you will. But yes, it is certainly an emotional knee-jerk reaction on the part of Muslims to even conceive that we came from monkeys. Primarily, of course, that is because of the story of Adam and Eve. God says in the Quran that he fashioned Adam from clay, and he breathed into him of his spirit, and then Adam was given life that way. And that Eve was created from one of his ribs. So taking that literally at this point, those who would take it literally would tend to sneer at the idea that we came from monkeys based on the Quran. Now, however, of course, we do have the problem of, as I mentioned before, this period of time when Muslims were basically cut off from free intellectual examination of Islam and free discussion of Islam, free discussion of almost anything. And so you have this kind of wild knee-jerk reaction with regards to all kinds of issues. Like, for example, the subject of women's education. That shouldn't be an issue at all. It's quite clear that in the time of the Prophet, women had very much a hand in the society. There were women scholars who taught men. So that shouldn't be a problem at all. So the degree of lack of knowledge, if you will, in many parts of the Muslim world. Not all parts. You'll find Muslim societies like in Turkey and Malaysia and Singapore and other places to be very progressive. It really just depends on the historical experience, things that they've gone through. And I also think women should be able to drive cars, for God's sake. At the time of the prophet, they rode on camels, so why shouldn't they drive cars?
Thank you. This is a question for John. You say that God is a mystery, and then criticize theologians for going on endlessly talking about God. But most scientists would also say that the Big Bang is a mystery. That is, we can't get back quite that far in our mathematics and models. And then scientists go on to write numerous books about the Big Bang. What's the difference?
The difference is science will tell you what they know and what they don't know. And I did not say that God is a mystery. I do not believe in the existence of God, so therefore you will not catch me making is propositions about God. That's their job. I told you there is mystery. Now, if you want to put a big happy face on it and bow down before it, you've called it God. I would not. I think words have meanings. I never legislate to atheists what they have to say or not say. I don't legislate terms. I just say if you are going to use the word God, please explain what you mean. What's the worst that can happen? A really interesting conversation, right? Compare notes on what you think about God. This, by the way, is amenable to the secularist agenda, right? To realize that these ideas have histories and lots of disagreements, even within the same religion. By the time of the formation of the Latin Vulgate Bible, the Christian view of God was about 20% warmed over Egyptian religion, another 20% was a weird amalgamation of Manichaeism and Gnosticism. Another 30% was basically Plato. So, these things have histories. They change all the time. That is what you would expect from a human-created social institution. And that's okay. You just got to know that we did it to ourselves. If you want to feel proud of it, take responsibility, but at least take responsibility.
I'm going to respond to that. Because I guess I'm probably closest to you on the panel, but here's where we do disagree. First of all, you don't have to put a happy face on God.
But I saw it in the
as Mordecai Kaplan says, then God is the force for righteousness, the force for peace, the force for maybe then you do, but we don't all agree with that approach. If we're panentheists, if we think we're all in God, then Hitler is in God as well as Heschel. So it's not an issue of a happy face. Also, as far as the mystery, I will agree with you that those of us who affirm the name do take leaps of faith. But the leap of faith could be, say, in cosmic unity. The leap of faith could be in the idea of that the ultimate is infinite. And those who are not religious, who are non-believers, also live their life as if there is no infinite. They live their life as if multiplicity is all their reality is, because they're not focusing on this other thing. So yes, we take leaps of faith, but by not taking a leap, non-believers live on the other side of a river. And I agree that we should be bridging the two. But for people to say, we're humble, you're arrogant, we don't make assumptions, you make assumptions. I don't think that's true. I did grow up with a mother who said, if you believe in God, you're an idiot. And a father who said, Judaism has a layer of bullshit, Christianity added another. So, I do understand the mentality of non-belief. But my point is, we all take leaps of faith in the way we live our lives. And we should all be humble. We should all be people of doubt. But to say the burden of persuasion is on the other is invalid whether we're believers or non-believers.
Thank you. We have room, I think, for two more questions. This one from online. Greetings from those of us gathered in Falls Church, Virginia, and participating online. And this, you can give the microphone to John.
Yeah, it's either we know it's one or the other,
Dennis
but we don't know which.
suggested that scientists can become dogmatic as he perceives the debate between social constructivists and evolutionary geneticists. My question is for John Shook. Where have you recognized dogmatism among scientists, and what role, if any, should atheists play in calling that out?
Well, atheists should call it out, but they shouldn't be the only ones. There is such a thing as intellectual honesty. Scientists, like any other kind of intellectuals from whatever sort of field they have expertise in, are not limited. They don't have to, speak only as scientists. That would be silly. Artists can speak to what is most human in us, and so on and so forth. So people of vast care and concern should speak about larger matters. However, when they do that, they should acknowledge that they are taking off their scientific lab coat and instead they are speaking philosophically or theologically or to a wisdom tradition or another, and be honest and say, it is not my discipline that says thus and so. These are just my ideas. I am now going to become a little bit philosophical. And there didn't used to be any shame in that. Scientists were among the finest philosophical minds, and often theological minds, if that was to their taste. But you knew when you were crossing that disciplinary divide, and you did it honestly and openly. Instead, we find too many intellectuals sometimes trying to cover their tracks and appealing to their disciplinary authority when they make larger pronouncements. The problem isn't making larger pronouncements. We need big wisdom more than ever. But we do have to put aside one robe or one cloak or so forth and speak on our own 2 feet and be honest about what we're trying to say.
Thank you. We won't be getting to all the questions. We will have one more, but I wanted to acknowledge a few questions that were sort of in the nature of comments. Someone mentioned that evolution, there was a phrase, the dogma of evolution, and the person said, well, it's a theory, isn't it? So it maybe not a dogma. Someone had a thought that perhaps KKK was a radical sect of Christianity. Might the radical actors in Islam be compared that way, that those are sects? So those are comments that people wanted to talk about, but we won't have time. And also the question about haven't we met people who don't have any belief in a great spirit or other God, or perhaps it might be Hindus, might have beliefs in many. So we won't get to those questions, but I want to acknowledge that they're here in the room, and if people want to speak with them afterwards, there might be a chance. So here is the final question, and it goes along a little bit with a question that I have, so I'm going to add them together. The question on the card is, the new Pope has a science advisor. This is for Dennis. The new Pope has a science advisor to whom he listens, and Pope Francis seems to be very open to scientific knowledge as it unfolds. How can such knowledge be reconciled with many doctrines and dogmas that were formulated in the medieval world? And I have an additional question that goes with that. As I studied Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, I noted the presence of minority opinions built into Judaism. I noted a technique in Islam to reopen questions as more information came, and say God is now revealing more within the dialogue around it. And I was wondering, what mechanisms are you aware of in Christianity that would serve in that function? So that sort of goes together. Thank you.
Well, I imagine, I didn't know this about, I was going to say St. Francis, about Pope Francis, that he had the science advisor. I'm sure that's not the first science advisor that a pope has had, or committees or anything else. But I imagine that he will work that issue in the way that is consistent with his style, and we know what that style is. It's pastoral, it's dialogic, it is firmly rooted in the human condition, it is forgiving, and so I'm not sure that there's, when you take that kind of position as a pope or as a minister of religion, or as a member of a church, a layperson, you don't see conflicts with issues that have to do with the constitution of the physical world. So I'm not sure that I understand the question, actually, to be quite frank with you. And I think to the extent that I would go beyond that, I'd go back to what you all said and what is said in the clergy letter. I'd be curious to know whether any Catholic official has signed that, but I think that puts it well.
Thank you so much. Do any of you have any concluding thoughts, things that you wanted to say, didn't have a chance?
Nope.
All right.
So I want to ask Bill Maish to come up once more to offer, on behalf of the board and his perspective, just a concluding, not so much a summary, but kind of a takeaway from this afternoon. If, Bill, you can do that, and then we'll close.
I'm very glad, Maynard, that you backed away from that summary, because how does one take such a rich exchange and summarize it or distill it down? So what I'd like to do is just offer some observations that I had of this exchange. When we talk about science, what I heard is that there's a place for that within each one of your positions, to more or less a degree. But science has a place within your constructs. And story is an important part within it. Story can be inclusive, story can be dividing, and story can be harmful. But story serves a purpose within the positions that you were expressing today. And it was interesting for me to hear how you came from different places regarding holy texts or authoritative texts, from appealing to them as a source of your understanding and your positions, to sometimes holding them at arm's length because of what they can do if they are misappropriated and misused. But those insights aren't the ones that will primarily leave with me. What primarily I will take away is the fact that you sat together at a table. You spoke a common language. You respected each other's as you were expressing yourselves. And even in the differences of the positions you occupied, you allowed space for one another. And in that space, I find hope. And I see that there is a possibility for this dialogue to continue away from that table, in perhaps our homes or our congregations, or in those places where we might have the courage to take it. I just want to thank you for enriching my life by your conversation and helping me expand my horizons today. Thank you.
I thank you, Bill. Thank you for your comments and your responses to the questions that people had. I want to just recognize a couple of other members of our board of directors at Wesley Nexus. Reverend Angela Mays. Reverend Maves is a new member of our board and already contributing to our deliberations, and Rick Barr in the back has been one of our board members from the beginning. Two others are hosting discussion groups in their own congregations this afternoon, and we thank all of you for joining us. Those around the country are perhaps in a little better weather conditions than we are. The weather commentators here have called our weather brutal, but those in the New England area are suffering even more, even as we are here today. They have a blizzard, another one. So we're already thinking about our program for next year, and what we're thinking about is something having to do with medical ethics, medical technology, the advances that we're facing, and If you have ideas about that, we would welcome any suggestions that you might want to pass our way. So avail yourselves of the things to eat that are probably still there, and the book table in the back as you leave. Dan Spiro is the one author here, and Bruno Heidig is another, and they would be very glad to sign their books. And remember the sponsors that we had for today. We thank all of the sponsors, and be sure and visit their websites. So we signed on at 4 o'clock, and we need to sign off at 6 o'clock, and I think we'll call it an afternoon at this point. So thank you again very much. So Gary, now that we're off the internet, Gary will give you instructions about how the drawing for the door prizes will proceed.